Having laid out the landing zone, I noticed an American helicopter, spit polished, big horns painted on the front of it, land, and a American Brigadier General, also spit polished, landed and wanted to talk to me as the senior officer present, and he painted a picture of very, very heavy action, lots of casualties on both sides. I told him what we were going to do, what our plans were, was that he said, you're into the big league now, and he said, you won't have to go looking for them, they'll come looking for you. How true it was.
The Battle of Fire Support Base Coral was the biggest and bloodiest battle ever fought by Australian soldiers in Vietnam. 25 diggers were killed, over 100 wounded. It was fought over 26 days by diggers of 1 Battalion Royal Australian Regiment and 12 Field Regiment Royal Australian Artillery. The events leading up to the Battle of Fire Support Base Coral started well before these soldiers set foot in Vietnam, with the Tet Lunar New Year holiday attack in January 1968.
The Tet Offensive was probably the decisive event in that the North Vietnamese arranged a nationwide series of attacks on towns and cities and government installations. This created a tremendous amount of fighting in the cities. It was even admitted by the North Vietnamese a major disaster for them, but the Western media turned it into a victory for the North Vietnamese.
Communist forces used this priceless propaganda advantage to strengthen their bargaining position at the May-Paris peace talks. They regroup in Bien Hoa province for a second attack on Saigon, the Midi Tet. Australian forces are now called on to help block enemy infiltration routes towards Saigon through the Bien Hoa-Long Binh area, an aggressive move that will take them out of their normal operating area of Phuoc Toi province into main force warfare. On the 8th of April 1968, Operation Ton Thang, Complete Victory, is born. The next day, the bulk of the inexperienced soldiers of 1 RAR arrive in Vietnam on HMAS Sydney. 12 Field Regiment has been arriving since February. It is these soldiers who will fight the most sustained and intense battle ever fought by Australian soldiers in Vietnam. Their average age is 21. Operation Ton Thang swings into action as 3 infantry battalions supported by 12 Field Regiment begin operations. Their mission is to set up fire support bases on a rotation 2-battalion leapfrog system, while the other battalion remains on patrol at Nguy Dat Base. It is the largest operation conducted by Australians in Vietnam, and is the first brigade-size operation with all combat arms undertaken by Australians since World War II. The operations are relatively quiet, with minor contacts but not a lot of action. That is until the 5th of May, when the North Vietnamese, while negotiating peace talks with the Americans, launch a new offensive. The attack fails, but Australian soldiers are ordered deeper into Bien Hoa province, 45 kilometres north of Saigon, to area of operations Surfers, Fire Support Base Coral.
Our task that we were given was to intercept and interdict main force enemy moving through or back through the area after attacking Saigon. And the emphasis was on the movement of North Vietnamese forces from that battle going north.
The enemy is now made up of more than just defeated survivors of recent fighting. The North Vietnamese have been sending large numbers of troops south along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to restaging areas in Bien Hoa province. The Americans, who call this area the Catcher's Mitt, notice the build-up of enemy forces in the area where the Australians are to deploy. But the Australian commanders on the ground are not told.
Arrangements have been made for us to do an aerial reconnaissance. This is Jim Shelton, the CEO of 3RAR, and myself, climbed on the aircraft, which was crewed by an American group. He got us into the area and then told us at that stage that we would not be flying below 3,000 or 5,000 feet. He must have known the situation in the area and what the activities were going on, which we didn't know about. and were not told about.
Bennett and Shelton's inability to get a good look at the landing zone will have serious consequences the following day. Meanwhile, Signals Intelligence receives alarming news from American intelligence.
I can recall Steve Zagon coming to me and saying, "You're not going to believe this, but they're going to put the task force into an area which we think the Yanks have actually located a VC headquarters there." There were two sort of portraits painted to us. One was that we were going to go into unoccupied ground and sit and wait and probably have to face a Vietnamese force coming out of Saigon. The Yanks said to us, that can't be quite true because you're going into an area that we know there's a North Vietnamese fighting force, less its echelon elements, administrative element, but the fighting component of that force about where you plan to insert.
But neither Bennett nor Shelton is told this information. Hughes informs his commanders of Scenario 1 and orders deployment for the following morning.
There was no information at all about enemy within our area of operations. There was also no information about the operations of any friendly forces in our area of operations.
People like Colonel Bennett, you see, battalion commanders, were not told SIGINT.
With limited knowledge of large enemy forces in the area, the Australians embark on a routine insertion. 3 Battalion, under Commander Lieutenant Colonel Jim Shelton, are to secure a landing zone for the fly-in of 1 RAR, then establish the 161 New Zealand Field Battery in Fire Support Base Coral. 1 Battalion, under Lieutenant Colonel Philip Bennett, will then establish 102 Field Battery in Fire Support Base Coral and take up overnight field ambush positions. However, it quickly turns into an operational stuff-up. Jim Shelton flies in on the 12th. On the way, he is alarmed to see the United States 1st Division engaged in a bloody fight with the NVA 141st Regiment near the Australian landing zone.
At that stage that we realised there were American forces in the area. They'd been there for some days and had been engaged in a number of operations. Again, we'd had no information about that.
This means helicopters scheduled to lift 1 RAR infantry into Coral early in the morning are now diverted to support the US 1st Division. Jim Shelton is then surprised to see his designated landing zone covered in small saplings, causing the American pilot to refuse landing. Shelton is forced to land a kilometre away, walk back, and clear the area in preparation for the airlift.
But when you look at a whole slick of choppers coming in, they would have had problems. So yes, we more or less enlarged the big area, but the LZ to me seemed to change a bit.
One of the few able to get into the air is 12 Field Regiment Forward Reconnaissance Party, accompanied by 104 Signals. On the helicopter is the officer responsible for coordination and defence of the fire support base, Major Brian Murtagh.
My first view of the thing was when we got over there in the helicopter and you stepped out on the ground and they said, "This is where you are."
Immediately, there are problems.
We came in 2 helicopters, and the first problem was that we became separated. So the reconnaissance group became separated, and I was with the New Zealanders. And the 2IC of 12th Field Regiment had disappeared somewhere and we couldn't find him. So the Kiwi guns had to be taken. They appeared overhead and they were taken at the point we landed. I then had to find the 2IC. And normally, in a deployment of that nature, the 2IC would have pointed out battery areas for the 2 of us. Well, he hadn't done that because the Kiwi guns arrived and then he disappeared. So we couldn't find him. We got in radio contact. We still couldn't find him. He gave us directions and we asked him to throw smoke. And the smoke appeared about 1.5 kilometres away to the northeast. And so the 4 guys and I marched off through the grass on a compass bearing and we found the 2IC. And I said to them that the Kiwis are 1.5 kilometres away. They didn't believe me at first. And so what I did was confirm our position by doing a resection back from a known point. And at that point I told him where he was. Too late for the Kiwis because they were on the ground, and therefore I think we just decided to stay.
There we were. This is where we were. But I mean, it was close to where we were supposed to be, I think.
Forward elements of the infantry also arrived at the New Zealand gun position.
The area we flew into was where we expected. The Kiwi battery was there. But the fly-in clearly was not going as per plan.
Observing the deployment is the North Vietnamese Army.
Thông tin nắm được là lúc 9-10 giờ sáng là có lực lượng đổ bộ xuống đấy. Để thấy lực lượng cỡ tiểu đoàn.
Mick Bindley's orders are to lay out a landing zone for the infantry alongside the 102 battery. but is horrified to see the 105 howitzer guns accompanied by Detachment 131 Divisional Locating Battery fly past his position to a new location.
So I went across and found out then where the other battery had come in, 102 battery, and decided that's where we should move our LZ and receive the rifle companies, because it was based on that location that they were then to deploy.
The rifle companies finally arrive at the 102 gun battery position.
They arrived at our location, not the original locations on the orders, so they didn't have a clue where they were.
I was surprised to see Scarborough Hearn and 102 battery already there, which was not exactly what was supposed to be going on. I didn't know where we were precisely. Embarrassingly, I had to ask Scarborough Hearn where we are. That's not really a good thing for an FO to ask a GPO.
Support companies arrive, including the anti-tank platoon, assault pioneers, engineers and 106 signals. Flying in at dusk, 1 RAR mortars are the last to arrive.
I got in around 5 o'clock and there's roughly an hour and a bit to go to last light. Hugh McAnally showed us where we were going. I laid the mortars out, then went looking for scrubber to coordinate the machine guns and coordinate some sort of a defence, and also looking for 3 RAR.
3 RAR have been tasked with protecting the mortars, but they don't appear to be at Jensen's front.
3 RAR headquarters had decided to stay adjacent to the fire support base, but on the other side of the artillery to ourselves. And they moved their, I think it was Delta Company, across to give them some form of protection. And it was this move that opened up the mortar platoon. They were in fact now on the fringe of the position.
And that's when the hair on the back of my head started to stand up on end, because I felt military, this is not a good thing to be standing here watching this happen, that these guys were going and not stopping. And then that means that the defensive position was us, not anybody in front of us.
Concerned with the lack of protection, Bennett decides to keep his battalion command post with the fire support base rather than with A Company in the field, a decision which later proves vital.
The moment I saw the situation about protection of the fire support base, I said, I'm staying here with my augmented battalion headquarters, a couple of platoons of support company, and we would see if we could offer support to the mortars and to the fire support base while we sorted the problem out. Now, daylight beat us.
The guns are also poorly defended, and the rush is on to dig in before nightfall.
And our defence stores and our bulldozer didn't arrive until very late in the piece. And the bulldozer was given 3 guns to bund up while the rest of the group dug in.
By the time the fly-in is complete, the night positions are Alpha Company are to the northeast, Delta Company are north. On the perimeter, the mortar platoon faces east. The 102 battery has a centre of arc facing east, Bravo Company to the east. Charlie Company is south to secure the road that comes out of Tanuen.
Stand to, we were pointing east. So our centre of arc, what's called our centre of arc, which the mortars called zero line, was east. And so was our task. We had what's called a final preventative fire task, which means your guns are loaded and laid on a selected target. And that was to the east, because that's where we expected the action to happen, because we were trying to block people coming out of Saigon.
With the infantry companies out in the bush, the fire support base is made up of about 130 artillerymen and around 150 infantry and support company. The North Vietnamese, having watched the fly-in all day and well aware of the Australian gun positions, prepare a massive attack.
Khi mà được chỉ thị của trên thì trung đoàn trưởng và các tiểu đoàn trưởng cùng với trinh sát, trong đó có tôi đi trinh sát nắm địch. Dựa trên cơ sở anh em trinh sát ở trên đài quan sát, trinh sát đã bám địch ở mặt đất, thì chúng tôi đi từ ngoài gần tối đến tối hẳn là vào sát địch để xác định mũi hướng tiến công.
Later that evening, a North Vietnamese Army forward reconnaissance party encountered D Company setting up their overnight position.
It was just getting dark and we hit a contact. There was fire everywhere. The recon unit obviously withdrew. There was 1 dead NVA.
While D Company under Commander Tony Hammett recover their position, the NVA Recce party moved forward towards the mortar position at the fire support base.
About midnight, Roger, Mackenzie and I were on the gun, and we both simultaneously noticed silhouettes coming in, and when they got to about 15 metres away, we opened up with a machine gun. We saw 3 bodies go down, but there were more than 3 there.
Reported contact to the battalion headquarters, and it was all over and done with fairly quickly.
The radio net went off and someone accused us of firing madly at something that wasn't there. 12th
Field Regiment got a little bit upset with me. Major Murdoch wanted to know what I was doing, firing at him. I said, we're not firing at you. He said, yes you are. The machine gun fire's coming over our position. So I asked him what colour the tracer was. And he said, it's a green tracer. I said, well, we've only got red tracer, and the green tracer's coming over me as well. So it's enemy fire.
We are to be believed. It wasn't a nonsense firing. We were firing at the enemy.
An uneasy calm descends on the fire support base. But in the field, D Company is not so lucky.
Subsequently, Delta Company, who was to our north, had a hell of a contact, and we fired for that.
About 2 o'clock in the morning, the ambush was sprung, not by us, but by a series of RPGs fired into our position. Unfortunately, it hit some trees above 11 Platoon, and which devastating results.
Ed Minner opened up with his machine gun first. That got me wide awake, and I opened up with my machine gun.
They fired rockets into the tree line above the machine gun so they could see the flashes from the machine gun. That's what did all the damage to us.
One landed just in front of my machine gun and killed my number 2, a bloke named Bob McNabb, and the other 2 landed in the trees above 4 section.
Perry he'd just rolled over to get new ammunition out of his pouch. He's on his back and it stitched him right down the stomach.
Larry Shepherd, he was right beside me. He got shrapnel all through his back and put your hand out because he was moaning. I put my hand out and all I could feel was ribs and backbone. He was virtually died on the spot. I didn't know I was hit until my foot got all soggy. It was running out of my knee and down into my boots.
I felt like someone had come in and kicked me in the shoulder, and I flipped over on my back. It actually turned me over. I thought, Jesus, you know, they're getting a bit close, they're kicking me.
Well, Graham, he got shot. He got wounded through the shoulder. I put a field bandage on his arm, but he kept bleeding. I couldn't stop it, couldn't work out why. He lifted his arm up, it had gone through his arm and into his chest, and he was still bleeding from underneath.
And Tomo was the only guy in the section that didn't get wounded, but the poor guy was left there all night by himself. We were at their mercy. If they wanted to come in and just stomp on us, they could have done so, you know. The worst part of it was listening to the guys after the rockets hit. That was terrible.
That noise will never go away.
This one single action has changed the course of the battle.
The mission was finished. We then had a discussion, or I had a discussion with the battery commander, Gavin Andrews, about putting together 3 guns pointing north and 3 guns pointing east. The 3 guns pointing north were the ones on the left flank, which were the 3 bunded guns. So they were now pointing straight, almost directly north. And at around about 2:30, a whole line of North Vietnamese got up after they hit us with RPGs and mortars for only about 3 or 4 minutes, seemed like an hour. Stood up only about 50, 60 metres out and assaulted.
To the front of number 6 Gun's position, the mortars are facing serious threat.
At about 2:30, Bob Hickey came over to the sleeping bag and he said, Skip, wake up, there's about 400 Nogs about 50 metres away coming in.
And they were making a lot of noise, a lot of verbal noise. And you could hear that amongst the explosions of the rockets and the mortars, like an Indian charge it was.
The first wave to come crashing through, there must have been about 50 or 80 that I could visually see in this line running through. And they went over straight through and disappeared behind us. They just seemed to be focused on the guns.
I was the mug that was out there at the time, and as I saw the amount of people coming in and knowing exactly how many of us were back there on the ground, I thought, my goodness, how the hell are we going to get out of this? I grabbed the machine gun, the M60, and held it at my level of my hip and just started firing.
going backwards and forwards along the lines of them coming in. And there was virtually hundreds of them coming in. And after a while, the machine gun firing about half a belt, I had a jam. So we were there with a machine gun that wasn't working. And I said to Bronislaw, Bruno, we used to call him, I said, Bruno, I said, let's get the hell out of here. And as we were running back, we could hear bullets zinging, flying around us, and I'm thinking, oh, when am I going to cop one in the back?
One of the sentries come bounding over the bun and said, you know, Steve-o, there's hundreds of them. And I thought, yeah, righto. And we looked over the bun, and there was.
The gunners opened fire with small arms against the enemy assault wave. Number 6 gun is also under threat.
They had very little chance because these guys came in so quickly, overran the 2 machine guns out in front of number 4 and number 6, and got into number 6 very quickly.
Even in the flashes of everything, you could see their faces, their features, their weapons. You could see the weapons spitting.
There were too many of them out there, those guns. We had nothing to fire back except our own guns. So we kept yelling at the number 5 gun, I'm coming in. Number 6 is coming in.
Max and number 6 gun crew evacuate back to number 5 gun.
Franklin came back. I asked him what was going on. He said that they'd got into his gun pit, and I said, was your gun active? Oh yeah, could it still be fired? And he said no, he'd disabled the gun at the time.
Tony King has already removed the firing pin. The gunners from both 5 and 6 now engage in close-quarter small fire action. This is the first time since the Second World War that Australian artillerymen have fought such a close action in defence of their guns. Number 4 gun radios into gun position officer Ian Ahern.
Sergeant Stevens had just about used all his small arms, and he was asking for permission to fire over open sights. Now that was a new one for us. And we had anti-personnel rounds, Splintex.
7,000 little darts that are in the front of the shell on a timer, and then once the timer goes off, the shell explodes and the darts fly everywhere.
We didn't know how to use them because we'd never used them. And after a little mucking around, we finally gave him a fuse setting on these that was basically muzzle action, and he fired 6 rounds in very smart time.
While the gunners keep the enemy at bay, the mortar platoon are engaged in their own deadly struggle for survival.
We're under sort of heavy ground attack. We're in the process of being overrun, and I requested 3 RAR mortars and 161 battery to be fired onto our position. And I remember Kim Patterson, the ops officer, saying, "Are you sure?" And I had to tell him 3 times what was going on, and at this stage I'm firing as well.
Call for defensive artillery fire, which he got, but it didn't. It wasn't heavy enough, and I suspect that the enemy had moved so close to him that it was all a matter of hand-to-hand fighting at that stage.
There was just chaos, absolute chaos. I recall at one stage Tony Jensen calling out grenade. He'd spotted this enemy, I suppose 10 metres or so away, who obviously seen us and knew we were there, and he was intent in throwing grenades at us. He was throwing hand grenades. One went off about 1 metre from our pit, and another a little bit further away. So, but I think he got dispatched.
And some were past us and behind us, and all you could do was just try and protect yourself against anyone that come within your range, and let the others go.
They seemed about 4 or 5 deep. You just started shooting.
My section corporal, Jock Whitten, he'd taken a tracer in the arm and he was screaming, and I crawled over to him and I said, we tried to smother it out, and I tried to pull him back. In the meantime of pulling him back, we both received a grenade, and he was immediately killed.
By this stage, there were we had already taken casualties. I'm sure Bob Hickey went with the first wave in, and the rockets that came in. Tiny Watson, Richard Watson, was grenaded in his pit. The same grenade got Barry Green in the eyes, and after that, Barry got out of the machine gun pit because he couldn't see anything, and he came back about 8-10 metres in my direction. So I rolled out of my pit and put him down there, and he was okay there. But then I was back up on the surface again, not in a pit, and this other figure started coming through right in my immediate front. And when he was about 5 metres away, I just let go with the SLR I had, and that figure dropped. But I assumed that he must have had a grenade or something in his hand and dropped that charge, because as he came forward and the momentum of that, something blew up right in front of my face, and I just went cartwheeling over backwards and was found in a different position next morning.
Enemy RPGs and small arms pepper the 102 battery gun position. Number 2 gun has already been hit.
The first rocket of the night took out our gun. It also took out Kevin Nichols. He lost his eye and part of his face, so I put him in my foxhole and covered his head with a 1944 issue shell dressing, which came with the 1944 issue mosquito repellent and foot powder. Scrubber Hearn came around later and gave me a morphine needle, but it didn't come with any instructions, so I didn't know whether it went in his head or his arse, so I thought he'd be safer down the command post. So I wrapped his wrists together with my sweat rag and put his arms around my neck and laid my rifle across his chest, making sure the muzzle wasn't pointed at his chin, the poor bugger, and we crawled down the command post, and I've got to say we hugged the ground all the way. So when I left him there, I got back to the gun and started to take ammunition up to number 4 gun, Johnny Stevens.
Everybody came from everywhere, crawling on their stomach with a round tucked between their arms, through small arms, rocket and mortar fire to bring the ammunition.
He'd fired about 80 odd rounds, probably around about 20 rounds of Spindex, and then every other type of round that they had, they were just firing high explosive rounds straight through the bund in some occasions. They also fired an elimination, which was exciting, because no one was expecting it.
We had the mortar guys out in front of us. They were a bit to our left. We knew that they were in trouble, and we knew that they'd got hit. So we were very concerned that our firing was going to sort of hit them. We were saying, shit, what about the mortar guys? We weren't sure. It was a bit of a worry. It worried me to this day what happened to those guys, whether we actually hit any of them.
So they fired basically 80 rounds. We couldn't fire number 5 until the mortars were down and safe. And number 6 obviously was in North Vietnamese hands.
Gun Sergeant John Stevens is later awarded the military medal for his actions. While the gunners are resupplying number 4 gun, the mortar position is still under heavy fire.
And Tony was in real trouble. And basically, his guys had been hit really hard and they were going around shooting him in their pits.
And I thought, quite honestly, I'm going to die here, so I better take some with me. And that was within the first couple of minutes, and then it was just a case of business as usual. Sort of had my rifle and engaged the enemy where I could, but I was also concerned about getting information through and trying to get some fire into the position to break the impetus of their attacks. I knew damn well that I was in the best position at that stage to see what was happening, and we weren't in a position to fire ourselves. So it was a case of staying where we were and make sure that my soldiers knew what was going on and make sure that they knew what was coming in by way of indirect fire support and try and let them know that there were people out there who were trying to help us.
Massive air and ground support has now been called in.
And our reply then was to call for airfield illumination, which was a spooky aircraft, an American aircraft, which had a lot of guns on it as well.
A Spooky showed up. Of course, this was a part of the fire support provided by the Americans. Converted DC-3, which contained miniguns. This aircraft would fly just low enough to be out of small arms range, and it would fire very slowly over the battle and would engage targets accordingly.
Spooky fires thousands of rounds into the NVA outside the Australian perimeter.
My task at that stage was to survive and to supervise and to control all of the supporting fires coming into the area so that we had a chance of stopping the attack. And one of our important jobs was to make sure that our guns and our aircraft supporting us were not conflicting with each other. So much credit is due to the battery commander who has all the communications and the staff and the headquarters behind him to make sure that none of this happens. The last thing you'd want would be to shoot down one of your aircraft with your artillery support.
The way the CO, if you like, controlled the battle, and I, from where I was, could see him standing on the top of the command post, which wasn't very high, but he was standing much higher than anyone else, I can assure you. and just the calm way he went about it.
On the flank, forward of the 12 Field Regiment position, Andy Forsdyke and his M60 machine gun team have been surrounded by the enemy. Gunners Chris Sawtell and Ian Scott are killed. Then number 1 gun ammunition bay is hit by an RPG and begins to burn.
And that's when we found out that ammunition in the open doesn't actually blow up. The cordite just burns off it. And the gun sergeant, quite wisely, retired with his gun detachment about 30 metres away and waited for all to burn out.
But all is not lost. The burning pit provides the site reference for the incoming air support for the desperate Mortarman.
It was just a stream of tracer, a consistent stream of tracer, and you'd look up at it and it was coming straight at you. But it wasn't, it was just slightly off. And it would appear to curve away just at the last minute. So, and it made a rip-roaring sound. That's about the best way I can describe it. It was a roar and it was a rip. And it was like just like a blur in the sky. Well, that made you feel good. And about the same time, the light fire team showed up. That is the helicopter gunships, and they were engaging the groups of enemy in and around our position.
We were hearing